Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
In the headlines this Saturday, January the 9th, in an interview with an Italian TV network, Pope Francis condemns recent violence in the United States and says it's time for healing. Innocent civilians die in Cameroon, where unrest and bloodshed continue unabated. And aid agencies appeal for urgent help for hundreds of migrants trapped without adequate shelter in freezing weather conditions in the Balkans. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. Reacting to this week's episode of violence that left 4 people dead during an assault on the US Capitol in Washington, D.C., Pope Francis has said he condemns all forms of violence. The Pope's words are an excerpt from an interview that will be broadcast on Sunday evening on Italian national television. During the interview, he reportedly also expresses his opinion that wherever there are people or groups of people who undertake actions that go against democracy and against the common good, it is necessary to find a way to healing. At least 14 people have been killed after a suicide bomber targeted a crowd fleeing a terror attack in Cameroon. This is the latest reported episode of violence and comes in the wake of a roadside bombing this week that killed 5 people and injured many others in the nation. Pope Francis has prayed for peace in Cameroon and reached out to those who continue to suffer senseless violence there. As Nathan Morley reports, defenceless children are too often the victims of terror.
The assailants, who arrived in the middle of the night, fired their guns skywards, which caused local residents to flee into the countryside. Just moments later, a young woman strapped with an explosive device entered the fleeing crowd and detonated her charge. Men, women, and at least 8 children were injured and killed in the explosion. The United Nations confirmed the atrocity, which happened in Mozogo, which is not far from the border with Nigeria. No group immediately claimed responsibility, though, but there are suggestions that members of the Boko Haram were behind the attack. The group in recent days has staged several attacks in the same region, despite the government's claims of success against them. Just last week, landmines planted by Boko Haram jihadists killed 11 security personnel, including 4 soldiers in northeast Nigeria. That came soon after 40 loggers were kidnapped and 3 killed near the Cameroonian border. The militant group has been trying to create an Islamic caliphate in northeastern Nigeria for the last 10 years. Its members frequently target civilians and military posts in northern Cameroon. Since 2009, over 35,000 people have been killed and 3 million displaced. For Vatican News, this is Nathan Morley reporting.
A passenger plane with an estimated 62 people on board has gone missing shortly after takeoff from the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. The Sriwijaya Air Boeing 737 reportedly lost contact en route to Pontianak in West Kalimantan province. Witnesses said they had seen and heard at least one explosion. Indonesian Transport Ministry officials say search and rescue efforts are underway. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, some 1,000 asylum seekers are languishing in blizzard conditions near the border with Croatia after their migrant camp burnt down. In response, several Caritas outfits in Italy have launched a fundraising campaign to help them procure firewood to ward off freezing temperatures. Devon Watkins has the story.
Authorities in Bosnia-Herzegovina are working to move nearly 1,000 asylum seekers into heated tents as harsh winter weather bears down on them near the Croatian border. They have been stranded without proper shelter after their refugee camp near the Bosnian town of Lipa burnt to the ground on December 23rd. The head of the UN's International Organization for Migration in Bosnia took to Twitter on Friday to announce that they would soon receive heated tents. The migrants, all men who mostly hail from Pakistan and Afghanistan, will still remain without running water, electricity, and toilets. Many also lack proper winter clothing and currently only receive 1 meal a day from the Red Cross. In response to this harsh situation, several Caritas outfits in Italy have teamed up to collect funds in order to provide firewood to help keep them warm. Caritas Ambrosiana and Caritas Italy, as well as a number of local offices of the Church's humanitarian arm, banded together to send 6 trucks full of wood to Lipa. Others will follow in the coming weeks to get them through the worst of the Balkan winter. This is not a solution to the problem, says the director of Caritas Ambrosiana, Luciano Gualzetti, but it is currently the only thing we can do to help these people to at least survive. The aid organization has worked since 2015 to assist migrants who journey along the Balkan route toward European Union nations. Caritas has set up emergency programs to distribute food aid as well as medium-term solutions such as soup kitchens and organized teams of qualified personnel to assist migrants through counseling. Bosnian army personnel, meanwhile, had set up small unheated tents and containers for the migrants after the Lipa camp burned down. Plans were in place to provide heated tents, but they were not ready by the time the blizzard hit on Friday. Witnesses say they saw some migrants standing in line for food parcels without socks or jackets. One man told the Associated Press that many days have passed since he last took a shower. "Please stand with us and help us," said Mohammed Afzal from Pakistan. "We are in a very, very bad condition." I'm Devin Watkins.
The civil war in Syria that has devastated life, the economy and the country's social fabric will reach a grim 10-year milestone in March. According to the United Nations, 83% of the population in Syria lives below the poverty line. Within this dramatic context, Cardinal Mario Zenari, the Apostolic Nuncio to Syria, highlights the precious work of Catholic institutions that, he says, is essential in rebuilding a climate of trust in a country that seems to have lost hope, especially among the young people. Robin Gomes reports.
Charity is the only adequate response to the physical, economic and social wounds that the Syrian people are suffering in the nearly 10 years of war and sanctions exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. According to Cardinal Mario Zenari, the Apostolic Nuncio to Syria, Catholic institutions have a crucial role to play in rebuilding the climate of trust in the strife-torn country that seems to have lost hope. Speaking to Asia News, the Cardinal explained that this mood of hopelessness is particularly affecting the young people who no longer find reason in remaining in the country. He pointed out that dealing with coronavirus is difficult with Syrian hospitals in appalling conditions and working only partly. For 3 years, the Syrian Church, in collaboration with the Holy See and the personal support of Pope Francis, has been engaged in the Open Hospital Initiative with 2 centers in Damascus and 1 in Aleppo. Cardinal Zenari said that they have been able to treat over 40,000 poor Christians and Muslims in these centers. This initiative testifies not in words but in deeds how powerful the weapon of charity is, the Cardinal stressed. In this critical context, the Vatican diplomat pointed out the work of Catholic agencies is fundamental because it is capable of going beyond ethnic and religious affiliation. Cardinal Zenari said that all of us can be good Samaritan and help a people exhausted by war and COVID-19. Each aid, he said, is a very precious drop, although Syria needs real water pipelines, rivers of aid to be able to recover from a critical humanitarian situation. He recalled the Urbi et Orbi Christmas message of Pope Francis, in which he drew attention to the suffering children in war-torn regions from Iraq to Syria and Yemen. In this context, he said, the Pope's apostolic visit to Iraq in March is good news for Christians throughout the Middle East. They no longer feel like beggars, but understand that they are in the heart of the Pope, Cardinal Zenari added. I am Robin Gomes.
In India, 10 babies, some of them only days old, have been killed in a fire at a hospital in the western state of Maharashtra. Staff members reportedly rushed to evacuate the ward early on Saturday and managed to save 7 infants from the blaze before firefighters arrived. The cause of the fire is not yet known and an investigation is underway. Authorities said initial evidence suggested it might have been caused by a short circuit and rescue efforts were hampered by continuous blasts inside the ward. As the tragic death toll from COVID-19 continues to rise and countries across the globe brace for a third wave of the pandemic with new lockdowns, the approval of anti-COVID vaccinations to be distributed to all provides a glimmer of hope. Within this unprecedented scenario, the United Nations has conducted the world's first global poll, asking people what their biggest needs, hopes and fears are. UN Under-Secretary General Fabrizio Hochschild spoke to UN News about the survey's findings.
I think one of the great paradoxes is COVID, on the one hand, induced this sense of isolation, this quarantine. People were more restricted in their movements than ever, than at any other time in 75 years. At the same time, the isolation actually induced a rise in global consciousness. And we saw that in the sense that there was a huge uptick in responses to our survey after COVID struck. That was one surprise. The second big surprise was the level of support there is for international cooperation. If you just follow headlines, if you just follow social media feeds, if you just listen to the debates in the Security Council, in the General Assembly in New York, you get the sense of a very fragmented, very contentious, very polarized world. But if you look at the responses to our questions, across generations, across political divides, there is a remarkable set of common interests. And the immediate common interest post-COVID, and this was the first ever global survey on people's priorities for post-COVID reconstruction, are better access to affordable healthcare, better access to quality education, better access to water and sanitation. And that against a backdrop, and this was the second main priority, that against a backdrop of the revelation and exacerbation of huge inequalities. So the second demand was a call for greater solidarity, a call for better support to the hardest hit countries and the hardest hit communities.
And that was UN Under-Secretary General Fabrizio Hochschild speaking there to UN News. And finally, global leaders are getting together to try to reignite international environmental diplomacy on Monday with a biodiversity summit that launches a critical year for efforts to stem the devastating effects of global warming and species loss. Momentum on climate and biodiversity stalled in 2020 as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. But as Pope Francis has repeatedly urged, the health crisis has highlighted the many diverse dangers of environmental destruction and is giving us the opportunity to build a better post-pandemic world. The One Planet Summit, a largely virtual event hosted by France in partnership with the United Nations and the World Bank, will include French President Emmanuel Macron, UN Chief Antonio Guterres, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and European Union Head Ursula von der Leyen. Organisers want to lay the groundwork for Crunch, UN biodiversity talks that have been postponed because of the pandemic and were set to be held in China in October. And it will see nearly 200 nations attempt to thrash out new goals to preserve the Earth's battered ecosystems. That brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. Join us tomorrow at the same time for more. My thanks go to Vincenzo Proto in studio. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. Bye-bye.